All right, we're live with Buddy Sotello. So, Buddy, thanks for coming to the show. Appreciate it. Have you are you familiar with Bookmarks? I know Kenny was on your show. Was it last week? A couple weeks ago?
Yeah, he was on the show a couple weeks ago. And yeah, I checked out the original COVID con.
Oh, nice.
And right. I was and I pretty much tuned in and out, all weekend long. And I'm a long time friend of Mike Lano's.
Oh, cool. All right.
So, and he's been on our show. I do a show every week called Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast with Evan Ginsberg, and Mike Lano's on quite a few times as well. And we've had some other great folks who've been on COVID Con, I think, and including Kenny Casanova, who's been a repeat guest on our show. So done about a year's worth of shows. This week we'll mark a year's worth of shows. So.
Now, how do you know Evan?
Evan I know through Mike Lano, and I was on his show as a guest years and years ago, and we have been Facebook friends for a long time, and then we said to each other, well, once everything got locked down with COVID, he lives in a one-room apartment in New York City, and I'm here in Novato, California with my family, and we were all just getting really stir crazy. So he said, let's finally do that show we've been talking about, where you give a West Coast perspective on wrestling and an East Coast perspective on wrestling, but more not today's wrestling, but more wrestling from the past, and how what made wrestling great and legendary on both coasts. And we've gone literally everywhere in between. We've had guests from middle of America and up to Canada and all the way down to El Salvador with our friend Javier Ost, who I think you probably had on COVID Con.
Okay. Yeah, we did. So did you grow up in California?
Yeah, I am as Californian as you can possibly get. I've lived in almost every major zip code that you can live in, other than up in Shasta. But I've lived in Sacramento and San Diego, and for a small time Los Angeles. But mostly it's been here in the San Francisco Bay Area and Marin County, where I've lived.
Okay.
And a lot of people don't know about Marin County, but all I can say about Marin County is we have the other half of the Golden Gate Bridge. The Golden Gate Bridge has to go somewhere. It doesn't just go into San Francisco. There's another half of where the Golden Gate Bridge goes, and that's Marin County.
Oh, that's a good point.
No one ever thinks about that.
I've never been to California.
Oh, well, you are missing out, and hopefully, I think a lot of people are going to get a chance, when they get a chance to travel, are going to go, visit a lot of places they haven't been before. You're in New York, right?
I'm in Boston.
Oh, Boston. Well, yeah. Guess what? Boston's a place I've never been, and my wife is from there. So I have to. Boston's like the one major city in the United States I want to visit, and I haven't been to.
What neighborhood is she from?
Oh, that's a good question. She lives around Amherst, so it makes it difficult for me to say. Because
Amherst, that's like 3 hours away.
Okay, well, but I think she lived in between where Boston was and Amherst.
All right,
but I can't say because I haven't been there, so it's hard.
So, what era of wrestling did you grow up with?
I grew up with just before Hulkamania hit. So a lot of it was. Have you seen the Young Rock?
I have.
That is the era that I grew up in. I'm right about Dwayne Johnson's age, although not really as successful as Dwayne. But that whole era of like Rocky, Soulman Johnson, Pat Patterson was huge here in the Bay Area, and the lately departed Dean Ho, who just died last week, he was a big deal here. The High Chief Peter Maivia, who was the grandfather of The Rock, and we had Baron von Raschke. It was more of an AWA territory. The Bay Area was more AWA territory, and WWF or WWF back then. And we didn't get any NWA guys. The NWA was still something that we had to watch later when we could watch TBS and Turner Broadcasting. I was a big fan of Mid-South Wrestling when I could first watch it, back in the very early 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw the original WrestleMania on closed circuit, and I thought it was so fun that my brother and I got tickets to see WrestleMania 2 in Los Angeles.
Really?
So I was there at the cage match.
Do you have the ticket stubs? Do you still have the ticket stubs?
Oh no! I mean, back then nobody collected stuff like that. So I mean, you're talking like make it through college and all that stuff. No, I don't still have the WrestleMania ticket stubs. But it was cheap. It was cheap. It was to go to LA Coliseum with the sports arena. Well, the tickets were maybe like $15 or something like that.
Who was the main event in LA?
That was Bundy versus Hogan in the blue cage.
Oh, that was in LA. Oh, that's right. Okay, because they went east through. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So So we got to see and then they brought down the screens to show the other cities that were we saw in closed circuit where the other like the battle royal they had in Chicago, I think, or something like that.
Right, and Piper was in New York, right?
Yes, okay. Exactly. And we were all glad when we got done with that boxing match that we got the cage match, and New York got the boxing match. We were all happy.
I'll tell you what, for my money, I think WrestleMania 2 is probably one of my favorites.
It's got to be one of mine since I saw it live.
Two or three for me.
Yeah, but we were all the way in the very upper part of the stadium, like the very, very, very top. And the pot smoke was so thick that you actually had to like push it aside so that you could see down. Because back in the early 80s, you could smoke inside still. So people were lighting cigarettes and, the weed was all over the place. So the smoke was so thick, it was like we were literally in a cloud bank up at the very top of the arena.
Was Hogan using Real American at that point?
Oh wow! Now you're really pushing my memory as far as I can go. I think he was still using the "Eye of the Tiger" theme
in WrestleMania 2. Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
That's a good question. And there was that very short-lived Hulkamania theme that came from the cartoon show, the one with the piano one.
I like that one.
He may have come out to that actually, because I think at that point the U.S. Express was still maybe using Real American. Remember, they were the ones that was originally written for.
Right.
So I think they were still wrestling at that point. So I believe so they may have been still the one that had that.
Now, had you heard of I was actually reading Piper's autobiography today. He mentions being in California as a wrestler before WWF.
Oh yeah, he spent a lot of time.
Did you know of him before that?
Yes, I knew who Piper was. He's big in Pacific Northwest wrestling. So I'd heard of him, and I'd seen him in his NWA dog collar match with Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Okay.
But I've had the privilege of meeting him twice. And the first time I met him was at Cauliflower Alley. And I said, Piper, I am a huge fan of yours. I've seen Jungle Ground and I've seen Hell Comes to Frogtown. Have you seen either of those movies, by the way?
Was Jungle Ground, was that the one he did with Henry Winkler?
No. Jungle Ground is like a real grade D, straight to video action movie. It's just awful. It hits him as a standard action guy with, guns shooting, coke dealers or whatever. I barely remember it, but I said, I loved you in Jungle Ground and Hell Comes to Frogtown. By the way, have you ever seen Hell Comes to Frogtown?
I haven't, no.
No, then you're not a Piper fan yet. You need to see Hell Comes to Frogtown because that truly, and I'm an aficionado of bad movies. And Hell Comes to Frogtown is one of the worst movies ever made, hands down. You'll find it on a lot of lists.
What year? Wait, I'm looking at his IMDb. When was that? What year was this?
Hell Comes to Frogtown? Oh my God. Maybe we're talking like 1990.
Oh, I see it. 1988.
1988. So, okay. And I said to him, I'm a big fan of both of those movies. And he said, son, you're a bigger fan of my movies than I am.
That's funny. His first movie His first movie was The One and Only with Henry Winkler.
Yeah, now that correct. But Jungle Ground is no one and only. That it's garbage cinema. But Hell Comes to Frogtown is so bad it's good, because Roddy Piper is in a post-nuclear world filled with people who are frogs. I that's the best way I can possibly describe it. And to watch it is an experience.
So what was it? So what was he like when you met him?
Super nice. He had, this was, at first it was at Cauliflower Alley, and the second time was the very ill-fated Russell Fan Fest in 2007 at the Cow Palace. And he gave a seminar at that one where he really talked off the cuff about how much he had worked in places like the Cow Palace, getting himself his start in the WWE, and how hard it was, or the WWF, and how hard it was for him to get to that level, and how many dues he really had to pay in the Pacific Northwest to make it all the way to being a big star in the WWF. And it was a very interesting inside look to a guy that, if anybody in wrestling worked harder than he should have to get where he was, it was Roddy Piper. He really was so talented. I don't think there's ever been a mic worker like him since. And yet he wasn't the biggest guy. And he was a guy that was trying to be a tough dude, where you had, the Warlord, and you had, the Barbarian, and you had, Hercules Hernandez, and some really, monstrous guys involved. And he wasn't the biggest guy. He wasn't even as big as Hulk Hogan, but he was the perfect enemy for Hulk Hogan. And he knew it. And he worked that to a level at which, we still talk about him today. Hot Rod and Piper Mania is just as big today in a lot of places as it was when he was alive.
I mean, his some of the stuff that he said is incredible. Oh yeah. What does he say? You don't throw
just
a rock
when you think you have all the answers.
Yeah, that was
just when you think you have all the answers, I go and change the question.
Yeah, I like that one, and I like it when he goes, "Don't throw rocks at a guy holding a machine gun."
Yeah, and he backed it up. And of course, if you are a fan of the movie They Live,
yep,
I've just come
obviously
to chew bubble gum and kick ass, and it looks like I'm all out of gum.
Right.
So yes, and he says it, and you believe it. And I love the fight scene in They Live. That's one of my favorite fight scenes in all of motion picture history.
Yeah, I don't know if I put him as the number one person on the mic, but he's up there.
Very few people generated such magnificent heat as Roddy Piper, and I did see him fight Hulk Hogan and Paul Orndorff, and he teamed up with the magnificent Morocco. And the heat in that match, even though it wasn't really a built-in feud, was huge. Was just over the top when Roddy Piper came into the ring. Just the number of people that, again, hated him and loved him. I haven't seen, the only other guy that's comparable to that I've seen live would be John Cena, where half the arena was booing with all their might, and the other half was cheering with all their might at the exact same time.
If there was one question I could have asked Roddy Piper, it would have been, I need to know if the Morton Downey Jr. thing was a work or a shoot, because they must be the greatest actors ever.
It's a good. I don't remember if he ever admitted that it was. It probably was a work, because there was no lawsuit or anything like that came from it or anything. And Mort Downey is, the kind of guy that would be corny enough to do it. Of course, both of them are dead, so you'd have to do a seance to get the truth.
Right. I guess we'll never know.
Yeah, we were never meant to know the truth. You'll just have to believe it in your heart.
So, all right. So you watched wrestling in the 80s, just like everyone else who loved it back then. Did you stop watching at all?
Other than maybe the last 6-8 months, yeah. But no, I've always had it it's something that I've loved in the background. And what was interesting was that my brother had a roommate who absolutely abhorred wrestling, just could not stand it. So my brother, who's a fan also, I would record it, and I would like do a best of. I would, how, especially with like Monday night, well, back when it was primetime wrestling. I am aging myself, aren't I? But before Monday Night Raw, there was primetime wrestling on, and and they had the Tuesday Night Titans show.
Yeah.
For the for the WWF, and so they usually had one good match, per show, and the rest were all squash matches. So I record that one good match, and save them up over a month. Or do you remember when Global Wrestling was on ESPN or World Class?
Oh yeah, on ESPN. I don't know what it was called, but I do remember it.
It's the early 90s. It was like 1990 to 93 or so. I would record all that. I would record the UWF, and we would have I'd have like 8 hours of just wrestling. So when my brother would come over to visit, we would do like this toxic wrestle-a-thon where we would just watch all the best matches for the last month, all strung in a row on videotape, and just absolutely just mark out. So, it was always there for me. And also, wrestling wasn't on so much, so you had to seek it out. And wrestling was more of an event than something that you could count on always being on. So like things like Saturday Night's Main Event, those were big deals. Like when I was in college, that first started when I was in college. And I mean, you're talking like that was like everybody gets around the TV, the 13-inch TV, and, drinks a bunch of beer and, go crazy over whatever Saturday night the main event was that month or every couple months. And it was a big thing for us, especially because a lot of us didn't have systems in our college that allowed you to get pay-per-views or closed circuit. So your only way of seeing a really big event on TV other than on videotape was to watch it on Saturday night's main event.
There was nothing better than being, I remember being, 9 or 10 years old, 8, 9, 10, whatever, flipping through the TV guide. You buy the TV guide and you're like, okay. And you flip through it and it's a Saturday night's main event. You're like, oh
yeah,
my God,
you were like, oh my God, wait. Call your friends and tell them. Because there wasn't an internet back then, or barely existed. So you didn't have news of like what was coming up a lot. If you didn't hear about it from your friends, a lot of times you didn't know that it was even on TV. And then and a lot of people didn't have VCRs back then. So if you didn't record it, you were out of luck. You would never see it again. I
know. It's so funny when I think about like back then, like if you were watching a show that, well, a lot of shows back then didn't really have continuations. It was just one episode and then the next, because you couldn't miss one. But if you watched, a show that did have that and you happen to miss 1 week, or if it was like one of those to be continued, you just...
Or wrestling was that way.
Yeah, right.
If you missed wrestling, if you missed one show, sometimes you missed a lot. You missed like what the payoff of a big feud would be happening. Unless you read about it later in Pro Wrestling Illustrated or the Wrestler magazine, you're like, well, I don't know what happened between Greg Valentine and Jay Strongbow.
Well, they always did a good job at the payper-views of at least recapping why they were wrestling each other.
But then you had to get the pay-per-view to be able to catch it. So.
I'm thinking the last one that I ordered as a kid was WrestleMania 6.
That was a good one.
And then I don't know what happened. I don't know what year that was, but I think what happened is I went to high school and I got interested in girls, so I stopped being interested in, there's like a 5 or 6 year period I just wasn't into wrestling at all.
And now girls actually like wrestling, or you can convince them to actually watch it because there are so many women competitors. So you'll have to just see what the future holds as that goes. Maybe it'll be less likely that guys are watching wrestling and ladies.
Well, the funny thing about that is that in the 80s, wrestling wouldn't have been as popular if it wasn't for the women. The Wendy Richter versus Fabulous Moolah literally put wrestling on the map, in my opinion.
Yeah, it really went well, and then Glow. The popularity of Glow really made a lot of people watch, and then
I don't think WrestleMania doesn't happen without the MTV, right?
Yeah, the Rock and Wrestling Connection. As
Yeah.
it was. And I remember I was a big MTV watcher then, so there was that whole build up by MTV promoting the WWF through Cyndi Lauper's "Girls Just Want to Have Fun." That was sort of the bridge between the two worlds of rock and wrestling. And a lot of people don't understand is that Rock and Wrestling Connection did not exist before that. So MTV was something that everybody watched, or at least every person under the age of 30 watched MTV if they had cable. And for then the WWE to be part of it, or the WWF, I'm sorry to keep saying WWE because what it really was is the WWF back then. I've trained myself to not say WWF anymore because I don't want the wildlife fund going after me. But what was the WWF then really needed, that was the thing that set it apart from the NWA and the AWA, was that whole mainstreaming of it, that everyone knew suddenly who Hulk Hogan was because they'd seen him in Rocky III. They saw Cyndi Lauper doing all her stuff on MTV and using Lou Albano and the Iron Sheik and Nikolai Volkov, and suddenly they had the brawl to settle it all, which was Piper against Hogan, and that had the deal where Cyndi Lauper got involved with Randy Richter and Moolah got all involved in that, and that built it up in a way that we'd never seen wrestling in a mainstream way hype the way that say boxing was.
Yep.
And that made it acceptable to the American public to start watching wrestling instead of it being the kind of thing that was on a Saturday afternoon, but nobody paid any attention to it type deal.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of other subtleties as well, like the color of the ropes. I always thought that set it apart. The red, white, and
red,
blue.
white, blue, or
yeah. Every other promotion was all the same color.
I never even thought of that.
Watching WWF was just much more colorful than the other promotions.
Yeah, they became louder. They became bigger than life. They had movie stars in there. They had Mr. T involved. They had Liberace was at the first WrestleMania.
Right.
Forget that. I mean, Muhammad Ali was a special guest referee. They tried as best they could to make it something that jumped out of being just something that wrestling fans liked, and so they wanted to make it so that everyone would start paying attention to it, and it worked. I mean, even to this day, I think without the foundations of publicity that were set by the WrestleMania mold, wrestling wouldn't be what it is today. Now, on the other hand, Vince has had such an iron grip over wrestling for so many years that it's really stalemated and gotten to be a product it's very hard to watch, and one that I don't enjoy.
It's unfortunate.
Yeah, so I find myself drifting much more towards AEW, towards I like the NWA product that they had online, and I know they're just bringing it back right now. I haven't had the time to see the latest NWA shows, but I like the studio wrestling that they were doing because it reminded me a lot of the old days of Mid-South and Georgia Championship Wrestling.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know Kenny we were having you on to talk about your top 10 books of all time.
Oh, good. I'm glad we're getting to that. I wasn't sure I thought maybe the direction changed, because is Kenny going to join us here, or is it just you and me tonight?
It'll probably be just us. I guess Kenny doesn't
like
coming on anymore. We got some heat. No.
Yeah, I definitely have a top 10 list.
I wonder how many of them I've read. I've read almost. I think I've read at least 100 wrestling books.
Well, now they aren't all wrestling books.
Okay. These aren't all wrestling books.
No, there's other books other than wrestling.
Okay.
So I picked ones that meant a lot to me personally. Yep. And sorry about the phone there. It's an occupational hazard with streaming stuff. But I picked stuff that has influenced me, or things that have meant a lot to me. But I know, given some of the things that you have on the back shelf, that they would be that I might have a chance of having some of the stuff in common. I mean, for me, like the number 10 book that I put on my list was the Smithsonian Encyclopedia of Animals, because that's one that I read to my daughter back there every night when she was growing up, and it had an amazing amount of information about animals. And there's one on insects, and we just pick an insect of the night, and then we read all about it. And it's so well written, and it's great for kids, but it also is written intelligently enough that adults can read it too and get a lot from it. But that might not be exactly the kind of book that you were necessarily thinking of. So
that's a good. No, that's. I like that. I've got two young kids, and I've been reading them John Cosper's Tales from the Dad Side, which they absolutely love.
Nice, very nice. My kids aren't as into wrestling as I wanted them to be, but my daughter loves superheroes. So that leads me to the next book, which was the Fantastic Four Omnibus. Okay, I'm a big fan of the old style Fantastic Four. I think the Thing is one of the great literary characters of all time, and I love the Omnibus is the first 35 issues all combined. So it's like this big, it's like thick. It's like 1,200 pages. And my daughter and I just went from age 6 to age 7. We just powered through the entire omnibus, a couple pages at a time, every night. And just so that you know, she reads on a grade level now, a grade and a half higher than where she's at. She reads on almost a 6th grade level, and she's still just finishing up the 4th grade. So she's just a reading whiz, and a lot of it.
I'll tell you what, if you get a chance, you should pick up Tales from the Dad Side.
Okay, yeah,
it's John. What's that?
John's been on our show, so the next time I get him on there, I'm gonna hit him up for a book.
He was we had him on, and him and I were talking about how my kids are always like, tell us a story, and I'm trying to I'm like taking plots from like Goodwill Hunting and putting them into like kid stories. So John told me, he's like, oh, I wrote a children's book, because I had the same problem. So he sent me a copy, and my kids love the story. I mean, the stories are great.
I'll have to.
They're not wrestling. They're just funny stories, good kid stories.
Oh, okay, yeah. John's been on our Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast show, and he's due for another session. So I'll definitely have him back on and mention that you had mentioned that. And by the way, one of these days you want to be on our show, we can book you for Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. I'm sure there's a lot we can talk about Boston in your
sure.
Your background there. The other comic book that was very influential for my daughter is How to Draw the Marvel Way, because my daughter is interested in becoming an artist. And I remember at COVID Con, you guys had a lot of wrestling artists involved. That was really great. And she actually asked them some questions and got some nice input from the panel members. So I was very thankful for that.
Have you met Stan? Did you ever get a chance to meet Stan Lee?
No, I did not.
Okay.
But my Fantastic Four number 100 is signed by Jack Kirby. So I met Jack Kirby.
That's pretty cool.
Stan Lee, but I met Kirby, and I had lunch once with John Byrne for the X-Men.
Mm-hmm.
Big time jerk. I also used to work comic book conventions. So one time at a comic book convention, I sat right next to me, literally, I could have touched him with my arm, is Walt Simonson. Do you know who Walt Simonson is?
I'm not familiar.
He did Thor in the mid 80s. And
okay.
He's the creator of Beta Ray Bill, and he's an amazing artist. And I got to meet a couple other great artists too. I'm not sure if they would register or not. Guys like George Perez and Terry Austin and Carl Potts and Steve Lealoa. These are all, sorry to say, they're all 80s stuff. I kind of froze out of comics like about 1990. And then I for a while, I got into the British comics like Judge Dredd.
Okay.
Became a huge fan of Judge Dredd to the mid-90s. And then by the mid-90s, I just didn't have the funds. They got to be so expensive, and I didn't have the room. And I just sort of phased out of comics, buying new ones. But I still love talking about old ones. I'm still a huge fan. I'm a real Marvel kind of guy. DC, I only had a few, series here and there. But Marvel, I collected whatever I could get my hands on. So, and my dad was really into stamps. He was like, "You're wasting your time with comics. You're wasting your time with comics." And he was saying, you should be collecting stamps. And I said, "Dad, tell me the next time they make a major motion picture franchise off of a bunch of stamps." If you want to talk about collectability and things that are worth, way more than they started with, the next time they make a movie about a stamp, let me know, But comics are used as a source of movies all the time. And when they do, suddenly something like your Guardians of the Galaxy, which was worth nothing when you bought them, are worth, $50 an issue because they're now part of a huge franchise.
Have you happened to watch The Toys That Made Us on Netflix?
No, I don't have Netflix.
Well, there's a really good episode on there, which I'm sure you can find somewhere else, but about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Oh, yeah.
And how they went from being like this obscure comic book to being what they are today. It's kind of fascinating.
I have the first series of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I knew they would be a big hit from the very beginning. So I have I have all the originals of those.
Wow.
Yeah, those are a pride of my collection.
That's pretty cool.
They were a parody at first of Daredevil and how everyone was into the ninja craze in the 80s.
Yep.
And, people don't really realize they've just become their own sort of entity. Now, they're every kid in the world knows who the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are. But, I remember when they first came around, and there were a lot of other imitators that tried to also get onto that fad, but they're the ones that survive after all this time. Cowabunga, dude.
Yeah. All right, what do you got for number 7 here?
Okay, so then I really liked the Agatha Christie series of novels. You take any one that you want from number 7, anything from 10 Little Indians to Murder on the Orient Express, or, I read those as a kid. I just thought those were really, they took you to such different places, and they really put your mind in a different age and time set in an era. And you really thought to yourself, okay, the mysteries were intriguing. And I hate to say it, now they're cliche because they've been overdone so many times. But when I was reading them as a kid for the first time, I really loved them. And I also loved the Alfred Hitchcock novels that I read as a kid, which set me apart because not every kid wants to read Alfred Hitchcock. But I always thought, as an author, he's actually incredible. He's a great director, but he's also a prolific author, and a lot of people don't realize.
What's your favorite Hitchcock book?
Oh gosh, he has a collection of Halloween short short stories, ghost stories. Ghost. I'm trying to remember the name of the book, but it's like ghost stories to read before you go to sleep. Something like that's like the title of it. And they're just lots of little stories, and they're great. They're all just so poignant and witty in a British kind of way, very dry British humor, and of course, very brutal in the end. So yeah, that was something that that was right before I started getting into H.P. Lovecraft, and that's a whole different discussion for another time. H.P. Lovecraft's definitely an acquired taste, and not as easy to read through, but he's a hell of an author. I don't know any particular book that I would recommend by H.P. Lovecraft, but a lot of people hear about what he's all about, but they don't actually read what he's actually.
The Hitchcock book is called Ghost Stories for Young People.
That's it.
I won't tell anyone where to pick it up because Alfred Hitchcock has refused to come on the show.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I don't want to promote any of his stuff. So
you'll have another one of those seance shows,
right?
Where,
yeah.
you bring him back along with Roddy Piper and Muhammad Ali, and you could have a hell of a show if you brought them all back. Now here's one for your kids if you haven't read it to them yet. Have you read them, The Phantom Tollbooth? That's the number 6 one that I wanted to.
No, I haven't actually.
That is a great book. It's a great book. It's a great movie. I'm sorry?
I wonder if are they too young for that?
No. I read it when I was like 6 or 7 years old.
Oh, okay.
Most kids are under 7 years old. My grandmother read it to me when I had the chicken pox, and I was home like for a week, and she read it to me, and it still makes an impression on me. It's wonderful. It's so imaginative, and it really set my mind in a different. There's a lot of very witty use of language and phraseology that's very clever, and yet it's something that I think will resonate with your kids. So if you have a chance to read it to your kids or have them read it, I think they'll really like it.
No, I will. That's a good recommendation. Thank you for that.
So then we come to my college years, which are 2 books that you will wait to read to your kids. One is The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, and the other is The Anarchist Cookbook. Okay. And Steal This Book. Those were all F the system, an eye-opener as far as books that contain truly outrageous material. But I ate it up. I just thought it was amazing to have people having these kind of rebellious perspectives and being able to, write them all down. And, there's a whole generation of people that are influenced by what was written in those books. And so,
apparently
young kids, no, you don't want them learning how to make gunpowder and, how to make pot brownies. But the Anarchist Cookbook, the stuff that's not just the crazy recipes in there, but the philosophy that's in there is pretty amazing and pretty wild. So
what is that's interesting. Yeah. I think you can still buy that. I think you can still purchase that book, right?
It goes in and out of print. It's not so easy to obtain, but I think you can actually read it now online. There's probably
I think they're still selling them on eBay and Amazon. You can find them.
It was really hard to find.
Oh, really?
The other book. Oh, that reminds me. I didn't put it on the list.
Hold on. My producer wants to let it be known that you can still buy the Anarchist Cookbook, but if there's a kids book with rhyming words, those are illegal. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. The Seuss stuff is out of print. But there is one book that is impossible to find that I unfortunately lent out in college to somebody else, and now you can't get it anymore because of copyright reasons. It's called How to Read Donald Duck. Boy, I should have put it on that list before, but now that we've talked about it.
Really?
Yeah. It was written by a guy in South America who watched all the Disney stuff at the time and said how Disney just craps on people of different races, different colors, different, economic strata, just tears apart, Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, left and right on every page. And it's like a 300-page book. And Disney went so nuts over it that they've made sure that it can't be published anywhere and that you can't buy it anywhere in the world.
In a related story, Disney will be producing millions of that book this year. No, just kidding.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Once they can figure out how to make money off of it.
That's amazing that back then that they had copyright issues back then.
Oh yeah. Well,
how would they know that? They didn't have the internet, so how would they even know?
Oh, because this sold millions of copies. It was in every college bookstore for for years.
Right.
And then Disney suddenly said, "Wait a minute, these people are absolutely slamming everything about our company, and they're right." That was the thing that's about How to Read Donald Duck is that they're right about about all these terrible things about Disney, and just
the book's available right now for $16.
Where?
Amazon.
Really? I had looked for it a couple of years ago, and it said it was not available due to international copyright laws. So maybe they've settled something with Disney so they can print it.
I almost feel like I want to buy this right now.
It's pretty outrageous. You'll get a good laugh.
Because I was a stand-up comedian for a long time, and I feel like that would be something that I would write about, just because it's funny, not because I'm mad, but because I think it's funny. Is it written in like a comedic point of view, or is it written from like
actually more like a scientific study of Disney? This guy really analyzes it and says, as a cultural phenomenon, if you're a South American, you should really hate Disney because they treat us like absolute garbage, and that basically Disney was such an imperialist and a guy that really believed that Western civilization was superior to all other civilizations on the planet, and that the Walt Disney World concept is so pro-American and so yes, they do, it's a small world after all and all that other stuff, but that's even a concept that just shows that America is bigger than that, because it can combine the small world inside of a park and have it be just a tiny piece of everything else that's all Disney, and nobody ever goes to It's a Small World. They got everything else. Right. So, there's a lot in it that is heavy philosophy that I really liked. And so who knows? That might be an interesting book for you to add to your collection. The other one that I want that I read too, that might not be on your list, is The Godfather. Godfather 1 and 2 by Mario Puzo. Everyone sees the movies.
Right.
No one ever reads the book. And the book has so much more in it, and gets into some behind the scenes stuff that isn't in the movie, that explains a lot and really makes The Godfather even more epic. Then when you see the movie, you're like, oh man, they should have added that. Oh, there was that part in the book they left out, and that would explain a couple things here. And so, I don't want to spoiler alert and say all of that. But Godfather 1 and 2 are amazing books that everyone just sees the movie and thinks they've experienced it. But I really recommend, if you have the time, to go actually read the books. So then I would put on as number 3 on my third level. It's a tie for 3 different graphic novels that I read while I was growing up. And one is the Dreadstar graphic novel by Jim Starlin. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dreadstar or ever heard of Jim Starlin, but it was one of Marvel's earliest graphic novels, and it is an absolute stunning work of art, and something that I'm surprised they haven't made a movie out of yet. The Dreadstar world of Jim Starlin is good enough to be a movie franchise one of these days if they did it right.
Oh, cool.
The other one was God Loves, Man Kills, which is an X-Men graphic novel. It's the first X-Men graphic novel. Really poignant message about religion and freedom of choice and racism and fear of people who are different than you. It's a great message. And then the final graphic novel that I want to put there was The Killing Joke, which you may have. That one.
Wait, what's it called?
The Killing Joke.
Okay.
It's a Batman graphic novel with the Joker. And it's done by Brian Boland and I think Alan Moore. And it's intense. First of all, Brian Boland, one of history's greatest artists, just right there. I mean, you don't get better than Brian Boland. You can be as good as Brian Boland, maybe, but you can't be better than him, because they just don't make artists better than Brian Boland. It's an amazing guy. He did a lot of Judge Dredd, done a lot of Batman, but The Killing Joke is his highest level. And that is the part where Joker has gone from being the crazy clown with the button ear that sprays acid in people's face to a really, really psycho nuthead. Just the kind of person that is just completely insane.
Like the Dark Knight? Like the Dark Knight version?
Worse. The Killing Joke is where the Joker winds up shooting Commissioner Gordon's daughter, and she becomes the Oracle in the wheelchair. That's where she got shot, was in The Killing Joke. And it's brutal. It's a brutal, brutal comic. And it turned Batman, with the Dark Knight graphic novels series, that made Batman from, a silly, laughy, jokey kind of guy to really serious. But The Killing Joke turned the Joker into a more serious villain. And that kind of The Killing Joker is what you see in the Joker movie that came out a couple of years ago.
Right.
And that kind of like psycho edgy type thing where you really kind of get into the motivation of what could make somebody a psychotic killer like that. That's what The Killing Joke's all about. It's a hell of a graphic novel. If you have a chance to read it, read it. Then I'm getting towards the end here, so I got a couple more listed. The Kurt Vonnegut is an amazing author. I don't know if you've ever read anything of his.
He wrote, I think, one of my favorite stories, right? Harrison Bergeron.
He wrote Slaughterhouse Five, which is a mind-changing book. It's the kind of book. Well, first of all, in high school, I had a really cool. I tested into AP English when AP English was just like first starting out. They'd first started the advanced placement programs in the mid 80s, and so I tested into it, and we got a teacher who taught advanced placement English, and we did a literary analysis of Slaughterhouse Five, and that's different than reading a book. Okay, you can read a book, fine, and you're done with it. Literary analysis means you actually tear apart every corner of the book. You find out how many, like his sentence structure, how many like verbs he'll use versus adjectives per sentence. You'll figure out how many words he uses over and over again. And you go deep, deep, deep into the philosophy of what made that book work. Slaughterhouse Five is an incredible book that talks about time, it talks about death, it talks about the value of life, it talks about Kurt Vonnegut's own experience in seeing the bombings in Dresden, and 500,000 people died in those bombings. Okay, it was an intense bombing that absolutely they didn't hit it with an atomic bomb, but they dropped so much incendiary weapons on Dresden that just the sky literally melted on fire. And he saw all of that. And he wrote, he left his own mind to be able to justify being there and not being killed in all of it. And the result of that is Slaughterhouse Five. And it's about a guy who's abducted by aliens who have a completely different view of time, which is one of the most fascinating descriptions of anything that I've ever read in my entire life. They say that the Tralfamadorians, who are hands and arms that end in like a plumber's helper at the bottom, and they have an eye in the middle of their hands, and they talk like this. That's how they talk. It's by doing hand signals and blinking their hands. And they say they see every human being not as one, that their version of time is on every level. They can see you dead and they can see you when you were born. So you look like a giant centipede. Like that's what everyone looks like to them, is that so when they see somebody dead, they just go, well, that was just somebody at the end of their life, but I could just rewind backwards and just see them when they were healthy just a little while before that. They said a human being's version of time is like being on a roller coaster and having a tube attached to their head and just have to go up and down the roller coaster without knowing anything to the side of them or in back of them. And they can only see forwards. It's a pretty mind-blowing concept of time, if you ask me. And something worth thinking about. You know, maybe as human beings, we're so constrained by the shackles of time that if we were able to free ourselves from that, we would be much different creatures. And And if we ever could, maybe things would be so much more different for us. Animals don't perceive time the way that we do. And that has a lot to do with how they're able to live their lives the way they are. And we are stuck with a lot of guilt and a lot of regrets and a lot of sorrows that maybe we wouldn't have. We had a different perception of it. Finally, I know we're right up against it here. There's no better book in the entire world than The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I could just end it right there. Don't have to say anything more than that. There's never been someone wittier or got what is going on in this universe right now than Douglas Adams did. He was the most brilliant author ever. And his stuff, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, if you ever read those.
I have not, but I'm going to.
If I can give one recommendation, I can get you to read one thing, although I think you really love The Killing Joke. But if I can get you to do one thing, especially as a stand-up comedian, it's Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. First of all, it's incredibly British, but you'll get that humor. If you kind of like Monty Python stuff a little bit, you'll still like it because it's incredible. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy starts off like this. It said, in the beginning, the universe was created. This made a lot of people very upset. It was considered a very bad move at the time. And it kind of goes downhill from there. You know, his wittiness, his sarcasm, his ability to predict a lot of things that are going on right now, especially like with artificial intelligence and how, you know, human beings are never going to be able to create artificial intelligence that's superior to itself. So we're always going to be making stuff that has flaws in it. So there's a robot called Marvin, the paranoid android, who is the most depressed creature, the most depressed entity in the universe. And everything he does is a downer. Everything is beneath him. Everything that you ask from him, because he's so smart and has so many capabilities, is just the most menial task to him in the entire universe. Yet he's made to serve humans, so he has no choice but to use this incredible power that he has to like sweep floors and to like clean dishes and like feed the fish. And he's miserable about it all the time. And it's really the Marvin, the paranoid android character. Once you learn who Marvin is, I'm sure you'll fall in love with him. He's like the prototype, the early prototype for Bender the robot from Futurama. If you are tracking with me on that.
Yeah, I'll check it out. My favorite book is the Butter Battle book.
Oh yes, with Dr. Seuss.
That's a great book.
Absolutely, it is.
It reads much differently as an adult than it does when you're a kid.
It is, and as an adult, boy, you're like, after a little while, your tongue really gets tied in knots. I do have a slight trivia a piece that I can say about Theodore Geisel, which is that I lived down the street from him.
Really?
In the 80s, yes. I lived on 8384 La Jolla Shores Drive. He lived somewhere in the 5,000 area. So he was up the hill from me, but I lived on the same street as him in San Diego when I was going to school there. So I drove past the Geisel mansion pretty much every time I went to class. So
the one fact that I learned about him this year was that apparently it wasn't even pronounced Seuss. It was pronounced Soyce, like it rhymes with voice.
Really?
Yeah.
I always knew him as Seuss. Well, as I said, I always knew him as Theodore Geisel. So we're going to go from there. But he is a pretty well-known celebrity. San Diego, La Jolla doesn't have that many celebrities. So, you know, he was pretty well-known. And the Lorax was written from his experience watching San Diego plow itself under and make itself more like Los Angeles. That was his personal statement of seeing San Diego being Los Angeles-ized, which is really unfortunate. And I living down there, I could see his perspective on it. But quite an influential.
All right, well, we gotta get two wrestling books out of you.
Oh yeah. Kenny K's book, obviously, I love very much. Vader Time, he sent me a copy of it. But also, hands down, my favorite book, I read it so fast and enjoyed it so much, was Have a Nice Day by Mick Foley.
Okay, I have that book. I've read that a few times.
Well, as someone who's been a wrestling manager. His time in the indies that he wrote about, I was like nodding my head going, yep, been there. Yep, seen that. Yep, I've worked with guys who've gone through exactly what Mick Foley's gone through. Really made me respect Mick Foley on a level that I never really, knew him on. And his follow-up book was good, but Have a Nice Day is epic. And it's I don't think there's ever been a recapturing of somebody's independent wrestling experience better told than what Mick Foley wrote in Have a Nice Day.
Well, let's spend the last 5 minutes here. So I noticed that you got your start in wrestling in 2000, right? In All Pro Wrestling or something? All Pro Wrestling.
Correct.
Right?
That's in Hayward, California. Okay. That was the federation, the indie fed that was mentioned in Beyond the Mat.
Oh, really?
You see Beyond the Mat.
Of course, yeah.
Well, Roland Alexander. I worked for Roland Alexander. I actually was the attorney for All Pro Wrestling. And so Roland Alexander, in exchange for, my legal services, taught me how to become a man, gave me the opportunity to become a pro wrestling manager. So I worked a lot of shows in APW and worked some great cards with guys like Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe. I worked a match against Samoa Joe. He took a dive out on me. And I was there when Dilip Singh, better known as the Great Khali, walked through the doors. His first wrestling experience ever for anywhere in America was at All Pro Wrestling. And I did manage him for one match, which was really fun. My great idea was I was going to make Dilip Singh, or the Great Khali, into a rock and roll star. So I was going to call him Dilip Van Halen. And I gave him a guitar, and then he started like strumming on it and singing. And trust me, Dilip cannot sing. And it was hilarious. It was a fun, like light show thing that we did. It was a garage show that we did. So not a lot of people were there for it, but it was really fun, managing him for at least one match,
I want to be a manager just one time at like an indie show. I mean, I've done enough of these interviews with people that I feel like I have a connection somewhere. I don't know where, but
you could do it.
I feel like it would be fun to do.
As long as you don't have to take a bump. Now, that was one thing, is that I was a bumping manager. I really I had studied jiu-jitsu for 5 years before I ever got in the ring. And so I was like practicing every Saturday over at All Pro Wrestling's gym, getting thrown around, body slammed, clothesline, avalanched, really? You name it. I've had it done to me pretty much.
What does it feel like to take a clothesline?
Clothesline, you have to know how to. It's not the hit that is what's so hard.
Yep.
It's that you have to do what's called the schoolboy from a standing level. You throw yourself down.
Right.
If you don't, they will knock you down. If you take the clothesline first and you don't schoolboy yourself, then the next time they will pick you up, throw you into the ropes, and schoolboy and really wallop you with a clothesline, and then you will fall. Because none of the wrestlers want to think that as a manager, you're standing up to them.
Right.
So clothesline isn't so bad. The clotheslines were not, I think, the tougher ones to deal with. Tougher ones to deal with were, one time Malachi, who was part of the Reno Scum, grabbed the microphone and he hit me on the head with it. But the microphone had like this pointed edge on it. And it cut me right in the forehead. That hurt. Another time they did, I had a briefcase concerto done to me where two guys slammed their briefcases on my head. And one of them let go of it at the last second. And it like crashed me right in the head. Another guy was supposed to hit me light, but I was wearing a New York Giants cap. And he was mad because he was in real life, he was mad at me because I was wearing a New York Giants hat, and he was a huge Patriots fan, and the Patriots had just lost to the Giants.
Right.
And so he gave me just on the ring apron, he just gave me a real hard elbow to the side of the head. So I've had moments where, and then there was another time in a battle royale, I was just standing there, and you got to pay attention to battle royale because guys get tossed over when you're not even seeing it. And I just look up and just a huge leg from Max Justice just clobbered me right on the head as he got thrown out. I didn't even see it coming, and the fans loved it. They love seeing me get beat up. So that's one thing. When you're a manager, you have to get used to getting pounded. So maybe that might not be your cup of tea. If you could just be an on the mic guy or a promo guy and not actually have to get in the ring and get beaten up, I highly recommend it.
I just want to do one show where I could yell at the fans or something and be on the microphone.
It's great. The problem is this: once you do it, you're not going to be able to stop. It's addicting, and then that's why you keep doing it over and over again, because you can't. That's one thing that they talk about in the Young Rock that I think is very poignant. How Rocky Johnson is really what happens to people in wrestling. You get the highs of being a champion, of being a main eventer, of being on top of the world. You can't let it go. You can't just say, that was fun, I'm done, I'm never doing it again. Some guys do. They can. But there's a certain part of it, then you see it right in front of you, and you're like, God, I wish I was back in the show again. It's like being in a play or something like that, or being a musician, where you just go, I wish I was up there on stage with everybody rocking out. I know I can still rock out. I know I can still perform. And taking that away, I hate to say it, has killed some people. Their inability to deal with not being in the spotlight is why we don't have Crash Holly anymore. And probably a major reason why we don't have Brian Pillman anymore. It might have something to do with why we don't have Benoit anymore. Those sort of things. People can't take being a main eventer. Not everyone can take being a main eventer and then going and being a jobber and then being out of the business. It's hard. And the emotional toll that it takes on people is not easy to take. And it causes them to either do drugs or drink or get so depressed that they commit suicide. It's a sad reality of the business. So just know what you're getting into. If you do it once, then say, I'm going to just do it once. And then, don't make it an everyday thing, because your kids need you home on Saturday.
Right. Exactly. All right, buddy. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. And
it's very fun.
Where can people check out the podcast?
Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast is recorded every Saturday night. It's 9 p.m. Pacific time. You can find us on Facebook. Just type Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast. We also have an audio podcast. All you have to do is go to your smart speaker and say Wrestling and Everything Coast to Coast, Buddy Sotello, Evan Ginsberg. Your smart speaker will take you right there to the podcast.
Cool. Well, there you have it, guys. All right, buddy.
Thank you so much. And Eddie, I'd like to have you on our show one of these days too.
Sure. Absolutely.